What's up, everyone? Welcome to a special edition of the Console Corner, where we are so excited to have a special guest with us today, Mr. Henry Hoffman, the developer behind the fantastic game called HUE. How you doing, sir?
Hey, very good. Thanks very much for having me on.
Awesome. Let me go ahead and introduce our other cast of characters. First, we have SheWolf.
Hey guys, what's up?
And then we have Lady Fox Firex.
Hi everyone, how's it going? Thanks for joining us.
And then we got BrewtalKnight.
I'm glad that you saved the best for last. Thank you, sir.
Nice. And I am, of course, GKB. Again, thank you so much, Henry, for taking the time out of your busy schedule. I know to talk about HUE, and I know that it's coming out very soon. You guys are probably like on that last little bit of crunch time there.
Sure.
Yeah, so I know it's going to be launching, August 30th, I believe? Is that correct?
Yeah, so August 30th, which is, what day is that? Is that Tuesday? I think it's Tuesday.
Yeah, I think it's Tuesday.
Yeah, so crazy excited about that. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to stream the game and share it to your audience and everything. It's been great seeing people play the game after working on it for 2 years.
Awesome. So I want to go ahead and just dive right into the interview. Starting off, I want you to go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself, the game, your studio, developers, whatever you want to go ahead and do, and then we'll get into some questions and really grind you a little bit.
Cool. Sounds good.
All right, the floor is all yours, sir.
Okay, cool. So my name is Henry Hoffman, and so I'm sort of the co-founder of Fiddlesticks, which is a little studio based in London. I'm currently in West London at the moment, South Ealing, and the studio is me and this other guy. He's called Dan DeRocha, and our kind of distribution of roles is that he does all the business, like strictly business, marketing, that side of things, and then I build the game myself. So I do like the art, the programming, and then we also got another guy called Alkaz on board who composed the soundtrack, and the soundtrack is available on Bandcamp at the moment, and it's like 30 unique tracks for the game. And me and Dan, we went to university together. We studied video games design, but we were in these separate years. But whilst we were at university, we had the opportunity to work together on the game Cube, which is a first-person sort of puzzle game on console and Steam.
Fantastic game, by the way.
Thanks very much. Yeah, it was good fun to work on. And then out of university, we formed this little studio, and we've been working on HUE for the last couple of years.
Awesome. So I wanted to go ahead and get into an icebreaker question for you.
Cool.
Being in game development, working hours on end on a video game, what are some of the games that inspire you either today or games of the past? And the second part of that is when you guys are taking a break or you're at home, what are some of the games that you're currently playing? We're like a games podcast, so we always talk about games. So it's really interesting to see what you're playing and what inspires you.
Cool. So what games have so this is always a super difficult question because it's always changing in my head, so I never know at one fixed time what games inspired me. But I mean, there's a really obvious answer to this question. There's a really old school game called Little Big Adventure.
Yeah.
I think it was called Relentless in the US, but it was like this adventure game. It was so weird, like super surreal adventure game with these weird rabbits and elephants and stuff that you talk to. None of it made a huge amount of sense, but it was made by this small French team, and it had this really fresh European feel, despite being super low poly, isometric, and really retro. It was the first game that I felt like I'd gone on an actual adventure. Games before that, I never really felt like I'd embarked on an adventure, whereas this was kind of the first game to do that. And I became I must have been 13 years old, I guess. I became sort of completely obsessed by the game, and I joined a fan forum online, and it was this. I was on this fan forum every day, and what was cool is that I was producing this fan art and fan 3D art and all this other stuff. And really, it's kind of what taught me all the skills that I use today in game development. I was producing this fan art for no other reason other than personal enjoyment and to interact with this online community and stuff. But it took, in order to create 3D art and stuff, I had to learn 3D art. So I completely taught myself all this stuff and Photoshop and loads of drawing stuff and basic game development as well. I was I was like taught myself all this stuff because I was so obsessed with this game, and like I was a big part of that community. So that's probably the most hugely influential from like as a practical example, because of literally it just taught me everything I'm using today, really. And I don't think I would have had that motivation otherwise. Like, it's difficult to get motivation when you're young to do stuff that isn't going out and hanging out with your friends.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But like, if you've got this online community and you're all encouraging each other, it was super beneficial and gave me the motivation to teach myself like all these game development skills. I had no idea that it would lead to like working in games development. Now I was just kind of doing it for fun. So that was like crazy influential, I guess. And then I guess a more recent example would be, I know a lot of people say this, but Journey was massively influential for me because it was the first game that taught me you can create an emotional engagement with a video game without it being like empathizing with a character. Okay. It wasn't about having like realistic character emotions, like facial expressions and stuff. It was about being like an entire emotional experience and being able to like empathize with the experience. I thought that was super, super interesting. I haven't seen a game that's come anywhere close since. But I think that's something that I'm going to strive for like throughout my game development career, really.
Awesome.
Oh wow, that's awesome. Yeah.
What games do you guys play like now just to have fun with?
Yeah, so I mean, it's super tough making games because I don't have any free time.
I had a feeling that was coming.
Yeah.
But so I've just finished Inside at the moment.
Oh, great game.
Yeah, I love Playdead. Like, they've done some awesome stuff. And
what did you think about the ending to
I was
Inside?
just going to ask that.
Yeah.
I was going to say, what
don't-
was the ending? Like,
I don't want
what's
to.
your...
Yeah, I don't want to say anything to spoil it, but like that last third of the game, like that was like on a completely different level for me. I absolutely loved it. I thought it was amazing. Like, but I was starting to get a little bit. It was starting to get a little bit repetitive where you're just doing what you're doing at the beginning. I'm gonna not spoil it. Yeah. But when that final third broke, it was just like, whoa! All my expectations have been blown out of the water. This is amazing.
Yeah, it was obnoxiously mind blowing. It was when it was a full 180 from the way that the game was going for the first.
Yeah.
I had pictured two different outcomes in my head, and then saw the actual ending, and then I also did the special ending, and it's like neither of them were what I. Yeah, there is. There's if you get all the achievements, you go back to the farm area where you had to like go through the cornfield, and you go back down the like what do you call it, bomb shelter, and there's a secret door that you go through for a secret ending.
Oh shit! I'm gonna have to do that now.
Yeah,
I'm gonna have to postpone Hue's release now, unfortunately.
She's been hoarding this information because she hasn't decided to share that with any of us.
That's not true. I shared it with everyone.
She didn't tell me nothing.
I guess I'll have to do a video on it.
Yeah, for sure. That's awesome.
The secret ending, but it still wasn't up to what I thought it would be, anyways.
No.
Hey. Yeah, everybody has different feelings about the games.
Yeah, definitely. The ending's so divisive as well. Like, I see so many people super disappointed by the ending.
Oh, it really
for
is.
me, it was so surprising that I was totally on board with it.
Yeah. All right, SheWolf, what do you got?
All right, so this kind of goes into the whole game you were talking about earlier, which was Cube, and of course, you know, now with HUE, you use the color mechanics, and I would have to say, what inspired you to actually go with this method of game mechanics on using the color palette to actually control the obstacles?
Sure. So the way I approach design is very like mechanic oriented. So before I do anything else, I don't come up with a story or come up with an art style or anything else. I come up with like a very core, like pure mechanic by itself, and then I build everything out from that. You'll see that in lots of my other games, like I build Looking Glass. It's based around like a very core mechanic, and then it's kind of a world that's been built around that. So really, at the time, I was just thinking about like pure core mechanics that could work in a gameplay context. What I was actually doing is I had a version of Photoshop up, and I had a flat background color, and then I had like an object, I can't remember what it was, and I was just shifting the hue slider back and forth. I was just watching as the objects like became visible and then disappeared and then became visible and disappeared. I was like, well, if that object can like visibly disappear, what if it also physically disappeared as well? It's like the whole out of sight, out of mind. Like if you can't see it, does it exist, sort of thing. And I thought that was interesting. I thought that could work really well with sort of with colors. And I'd actually built I built a small prototype in a game jam before, which was about a little boy that had a torch and he's running along and he's kind of shining his torch on what he thinks are monsters, but then they actually turn out to be things like piles of clothes and stuff. But that was using the right analog stick in a circular motion to shine his torch. So I thought combining like this color sort of idea that I had within Photoshop and then this kind of right analog stick control method, that maybe I could use a color wheel to control it. And I spent a couple of weeks putting together this prototype, and like the final like input that we're using in the game is very very similar to that initial 2-week prototype. So that's kind of how it came around, really.
Oh wow. See, it's just crazy because when I was playing through the game and, you know, I was listening to the story and stuff, I was like, it's just interesting because there's so many colors in like the real world that people don't really notice because it's always changing. So to see it in a game like this, to actually notice like how much colors actually influence what you're doing, it was really interesting how you implemented it into the game.
Yeah.
That's cool. And that's one thing that you mentioned there, was that there's all these colors that you see and how it's always changing. One of the themes in here is like we all see these colors and then we all kind of assume that everyone else sees the same colors as us. Mm-hmm. But the reality is that like that's not the case at all. Everyone's got like slight variances. People with color blindness see things in a completely different way.
That's me.
Yeah, that's awesome. Have you played
slight color blindness? So I'm gonna have a unique challenge getting through this one.
Well, we've got a colorblind mode that I spent a long time integrating into the game, like a dedicated colorblind mode. So that should hopefully help you out.
That's awesome.
Oh wow, that is awesome. I remember talking to GKB about that when he was streaming it the first time.
Yep.
Oh yeah.
I don't know, Henry, when you're sitting here like talking about like, you know, the color mechanics and all that kind of stuff, like before we got to talk to you and everything, I was just thinking about how you guys came up with it, and I was just thinking like, you know, I wonder if they were just sitting around a table and like took a color wheel and just threw it across, you know, the room or whatever, and was like, oh, Eureka, let's use this.
Yeah.
But that's really awesome, man. That's really cool.
Cool.
Brutal, you got a question for us?
Yeah, man. Okay, so one thing that I've been kind of thinking about that I kind of take into consideration and that's kind of sparked my love for like indie games is especially is the broad skill set that it takes to pull together to make an indie game, and it's a lot more of an intimate project, it seems, than these bigger titles that they get released. Looking at your portfolio, I've noticed you have a huge skill set from web design, a lot of reoccurring art-related roles that you've taken on for a lot of your projects. I'm curious, like, how do you pull all these tools out of your seemingly endless toolbox? How do you pull all of them together to culminate into this production of HUE? I mean, because you have web design, you have art direction. I mean, I've seen that you've done some of the audio, the scripting for some of the games that I noticed that you did for With the Dust. Mm-hmm. How does that all culminate into producing the final project?
Yeah, so I mean, I feel very fortunate to have kind of taken this particular route in my life that's ended up that I've been able to kind of do a whole bunch of these different tasks. So what happened is I went to college without really I knew that I wanted to make games, but I didn't really have a clear vision of what I wanted to do. But I studied a course which was Media Studies, a Media Studies course. And that's kind of like a broad, like, you don't know what you want to do kind of course, but you'll do a little bit of everything. So what I did in that course was like video editing, animation, web design, audio production for radio, like all the stuff, like everything that I'm using today in video games, like in the marketing side of things as well. It's all stuff that I learned on this really broad college course, which I think is pretty interesting, because a lot of people kind of coming out of school and stuff, they're kind of shoehorned in one direction. They're like, if you want to make video games, go study video games, or like do this one thing. But I think it's actually like if you want to be able to run a business and do a bunch of stuff by yourself, you really need like this super broad skill set.
I would think that with that being said, there's a lot of I would say that there's even more a requirement for that broad skill set, considering that you're a much smaller team. So all those there's still the same amount of responsibilities as these big development teams have, but with a tenth of the tenth or 100th even on some of these huge titles of the team that you're usually awarded with.
Sure.
So does it help? I mean, I'm sure it helps being a jack of all trades if you would in these situations. I mean, you were the sole designer of a couple of your games, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that what I'm trying to get at is, did that class help you find your true north as far as what you wanted to specialize in, or did you go through that class and think, okay, I'm obviously going to need all of these skill sets to produce my dream? Were you going into that class wanting to develop games, or?
Sure, no, it was a complete accident, really. Well, I knew that I wanted to make games, and I did media studies because it was just a course that was a little bit creative, and it was kind of close to my home at the time. I had no idea that like doing all this animation, all this video stuff, and all that would turn out to be used in me doing video games. At the time, indie games weren't really that much of a thing. Like when I knew that I wanted to do video games, I kind of wanted to go into a studio, I guess, like a larger studio. And that's kind of what I assumed I would do, but I didn't really. I thought I was going to be doing art because I had more of an art-based background, I guess. Yeah. But I was never really like super good at art. Like I can't do character design or like concept art very well at all, really. I've tried. It's just not very good. But I think, yeah, it feels to me like a series of coincidences that have ended up here. Because after I did college, I went to university and I studied video games design, which is more specialist. But a lot of other people going into that course maybe had come from more formal education, like they hadn't had this sort of broad media studies thing before, so they didn't really know how to edit videos, do audio, or anything like that. And I kind of went into that course, I had no programming experience apart from a little bit of web stuff. So I didn't really know how to program a game, but in my final year I realized that actually if I want to make the sort of games that I want to make, I need to be able to program as well. So it was my third year of university where I taught myself programming.
That's excellent, man. Programming takes a very specific mindset to be able to fully. I've tried my hand at programming and coding, and I gotta say, man, that is not in my wheelhouse. I'll say that much.
No.
I can do the concept art stuff.
Yeah, SheWolf drops concept art all the time. She's
awesome.
She's very skilled.
Cool.
I had if you guys don't mind, I have one more question.
Let's save it for the second round, and then
we got a second round.
Yeah, we got a second round.
Second round.
Right.
I want to let Fox get her question in here. Go ahead, Fox.
Yeah, and with all those awesome skills that you talked about, what type of games do you think is easier to develop for, mobile games or indies, that are in consoles?
So I think mobile games are definitely easier. Having worked from, I did a mobile game as kind of my first ever proper commercial project, and I think the expectation is less. So you don't need to do these in-depth storylines, or there doesn't need to be all this narrative development and character development. It doesn't need to feel like you've gone on this adventure. It can be quite disposable, and I think that definitely makes designing video games easier. But then again, if you're trying to run a business, then I think making mobile games is probably harder because that's such a saturated market. So it's really, I think to make a good game it's easier on mobile, but to run a successful business, it's probably a little bit easier on console because it's less competitive.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Cool. All right, so my next question for you, Henry, is HUE. First off, is an absolute pleasure to play. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, HUE has some great puzzle platforming, and I like that it progresses through the difficulty as you play through the game. It starts off pretty easy, and then the last 25%, like I was telling you earlier, is just drove me crazy with all the puzzles. I want to hear how you come up with the puzzles and what it took to design all these things, because as they progress, you add so many mechanics in here with color and stuff, and I wanted to know how that whole design process came about.
Yeah, so like designing puzzles for HUE was by far the hardest part of game development, I think. Like it was.
Did you pull your hair out as much as I did, like in the last 25%?
I did, but like multiply that by 10. I'm surprised I've got any hair left now. But it's what's so hard about designing puzzles is it's like solving a puzzle that doesn't exist in reverse.
Right.
So it's like so you've got to try and create a solution to this puzzle that doesn't exist in your head backwards, and it's like it messes with your mind a little bit. But the way that I did it really is I would have a very basic idea, like if I've got a game mechanic that I want to use, how can I use this in a way that hasn't been used before in an interesting way to solve a puzzle? And what I'll do is I'll design that on a piece of paper, this puzzle idea that's very rough, and then I'll go onto the computer and I'll try and create it, and it completely won't work at all. I don't think a single puzzle that I've designed on paper has worked when I've built it in game. So, so I'll design on paper and it just completely won't work. But what it will be is it will be like a starting point, and I'll use that starting point and that kind of idea that was behind the puzzle to try and flesh something else out. And there's been days like, wow, this dog. There's been days where like I've got impending deadlines. Like I need to have like 10 puzzles done by this day, and I'll have a day where I'm just like, I just can't think of a single puzzle. My brain just doesn't want to create a puzzle, and so I've had to try and like brute force it to create puzzles, and then eventually, for some reason, it does. It's like, you know, when you get writer's block, like you need to write something and then it just doesn't come. You definitely get that with puzzle design as well, and you just can't think what you could possibly do. So I mean, that's kind of how we design puzzles. But when it came to mechanics, what we would do is we would we had the core mechanic first of all, which was the color wheel and changing the background color. But when we wanted to add these sort of environmental mechanics, our first port of call would be like, what can we do that's first of all, what can we do that's surprising? Like, what's gonna surprise the player? And then if it passes the surprise test, we'll go on to the next thing, which is like, would this mechanic interact with the other mechanics that we have in an interesting way? Like, does it not? If it just serves a single purpose, like it's something you can push or something,
right?
Then that's not very interesting. But if it interacts with all the other things like balloons and pressure pads and like moving platforms and stuff, if it interacts with all these other things in interesting and unexpected ways, that creates this whole load of potential for each individual mechanic that you can use with all the other different stuff. So that's kind of how we decided on mechanics. There was a bunch of stuff that we scrapped that didn't work. Like visually, mechanics, if it's going to be a colored object, it has to be like a solid color, like a square or a block or something. What I did originally is we had like these colored ladders, but they were quite spindly, and it becomes difficult to kind of match the colors when visually it's not like a big block of color. Right. That was something we had trouble with like the lasers. What we did as a solution is at the beginning of the laser, like the laser source, we have this big circle of color, which makes it much easier to kind of match.
Those lasers drove me crazy.
Yeah. Pretty punishing.
You know, I have to say, when it comes to this game, you know, most of these style games, the indie games and stuff like that, they use repetitive maps. Like, they always use the cookie cutter style levels and stuff like that. And your game didn't have that. Every level had something different, whether it was the lasers, the skulls, just like everything different added to it. And it made it really great. And with that being added, you know, one of the other aspects of your game, which I don't want to go too far into detail to, you know, give any spoilers, but what could you comment on when it comes to the story and where you came up with the concept of the story that goes with this game?
Sure. So I'm pleased you mentioned that none of the levels are the same, because that's something I'm very much against. So I'm very much against padding in games because it serves no purpose. Like, right. And what I wanted is for every level had to have some sort of purpose, whether it was using something in a different way. It couldn't just be a level where you're rearranging crates in a different order to another level where you're rearranging crates, because then it's like, well, what's the point? It's essentially the same puzzle, but things have just been moved around. But actually, I was so against padding at the beginning of development that there was none of these sort of corridor sections. It was just like level after level after level after level after level. And the one thing that I learned really from playtesting is that there's a difference between like padding and downtime, and this is a massive thing that I learned that I didn't really understand before I started this project. But what you need is that if you've got this intensity building up with your puzzles, there needs to be a release in order for the player to feel like they're able to progress. So this is kind of where these dialogue sequences come in. So you collect these letters in these corridors, and then you've got this kind of like downtime where you can kind of relax, like get your thoughts together, contemplate about how you've solved the previous puzzles, and then kind of prepare yourself mentally for the puzzles ahead.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of ties into the narrative. The narrative was like really difficult because I've not done any sort of creative writing before. That's definitely not one of the skills that I learned on my media studies course. That was something I had to try and blag a little bit this time. I think I rewrote the script like 40 times or something like that.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
It took a long time because it was really bad to begin with. It was really bad. But it took a lot of refining to try and get it into a place that I was happy with. What was really important is that there's this idea that so your mother's a researcher. She studies the theory of colors in a world that is black and white. So to her, the theory of colors is like this hypothetical concept. Like colors don't exist, but she studies colors as a concept. But then she becomes obsessed with that. She's kind of she becomes obsessed with these colors, and she's convinced that they do exist and that she can somehow create something that allows her to see them. So she ends up creating this kind of colored ring that allows her to perceive color, and then by doing so, she disappears under these sort of mysterious circumstances.
Yeah.
And kind of as you play throughout the game, I don't know how far you guys have got, but you start with certain expectations. You're kind of at the very beginning of the game, you're told about certain characters,
right,
about your mother, and you kind of assume that is the situation. But then you see, like, as you play throughout the game, these kind of characters, their character arcs, they kind of switch places, and then you find yourself kind of switching allegiance mentally and kind of understanding.
That totally happened to me as well, because I was thinking one way in the beginning, and then at the end it was just completely different, and I was like, oh wow.
Yeah, exactly. So that was the idea, really, is that we wanted to completely play with the player's expectations, and we drew a lot of inspiration. So there's a philosophical, I can't remember what it's called. It's a philosophical thought argument or something. It's called the knowledge argument, and it's a study about, or it's like a philosophical study theory thing about this woman who is a scientist. You'll see the parallels here with HUE storyline. But she lives in she lives in a black and white room, and she can only see everything in her room is black and white, so she's got no way of seeing any color whatsoever. And the idea is that if she then saw a colored object, if she was presented with something colored, whether she had learnt new information from seeing it. So she's a scientist, so she knows everything there is about color. She knows like how the light bounces off it, its molecular makeup, everything like that. But the question is whether she actually learned something by seeing color, and whether experience brings with it sort of knowledge. And I thought that was really interesting, and then that was like a massive influence. And then I got massively sidetracked researching color theory and a bunch of other stuff, and then it all kind of fed into this sort of narrative with HUE and his mother, really.
It's really neat to always hear how in-depth what inspired developers to create their games, and it's always amazing to hear, because you can tell in this story. I know you said you rewrote it, a good amount of time, but you can tell like this story is very in-depth, and you can feel that as you're playing the game. And the narrator that you had for it, she did an amazing job telling the story, and you can just it's almost like you can picture it as she talks, because her voice flows so nicely with the music and the game itself.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. All right, Brutal, go up.
I have slightly a different question. It's still related to HUE, but it's kind of relating to the development process as a whole, and the emotional roller coaster that you probably go through while you're developing this game. So I'm imagining, like, when you first get this idea and this project that you're starting, whether it's HUE or another game you've developed, that it's almost like you have that initial rush of emotion that you're ready to get this game going. And were there ever any points or like points of conflict or just lack of motivation during the development process that you just kind of like wanted it to be done, or are you just like riding this wave of euphoria through the entire development? You know.
Nice.
Yeah, so that's a super apt question, because this has been completely different in that regard to any other game that I've worked on. So at the beginning of the project, I built a 2-week prototype, and then I was taking it to investors so that we could try and get funding to turn it into a full game.
Right.
And I put this 2-week prototype together, and we started talking to these investors, and they were interested. But it was 6 months before we actually got the investment through. So by the time that I built the prototype, I hadn't touched it then for 6 months, and then the project suddenly started. I'd kind of lost all interest in the game by that point. Like six months ago that I built that prototype. So I had no motivation at the beginning of the project really at all. And then so what I was doing is I was working really hard. Like I was working long hours, but like the motivation wasn't there. So all I was doing was procrastinating, and nothing was really getting done, and nothing was looking like how I wanted it to look.
Procrastinating is one of my main skill sets. So
awesome. Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. So normally on every other project that I've done, I've been massively like inspired at the beginning of the project, and then as the project has dragged on, like I'll start prototyping other ideas, and then I'll massively lose interest. But what happened with HUE is I was kind of disinterested at the beginning because of this 6-month lull. And then motivation slowly, like we started entering it into awards and stuff and like competitions, and then it started gaining traction there. And then I was like, these people expect kind of a game, and all I've got is like this really short demo that we're showcasing. So then I started to feel like external pressure, that there was the weight of expectation for this to be like actually a good game. So suddenly, it was a grind, but I got through the first kind of year without working at kind of 100% capacity, but like I was working and I was getting stuff done. And then there was this one award ceremony which is like really big in the UK, down in Brighton, and it's called Develop Conference, and we won a Develop Indie Showcase Award there, and that's like for us that's like a crazy big deal, and that freaked me out. I was like,
was that for your demo? Or was
so this was still like a really small demo, like because it was an award ceremony thing. People don't really play more than 30 minutes. So
that had to have been like a huge confidence booster there, right?
What? It was.
He's on the hot seat now.
So in my mind, what it had done is it had said like everyone really loves this 30-minute demo that you've created. But like soon, you need a 5-hour game. Like,
right.
People need to love this 5-hour game as much as they love this 30-minute demo. So I was pretty confident that we had made quite a good 30-minute demo, but I was way not confident that we were going to be able to turn that into a full game. So, but then the final year of development, something switched. Like I think it was after we won that award, something switched, and like I couldn't do anything else but work. I was working like 7 days a week, 18-hour days. Like pretty much constantly for about a solid year. And that's pretty much where I built most of the game. So I built like all the fire world, all the temple worlds, like all the tech, all the university, and all the mountains and stuff. All that was done in the final, like all the content and the story and all the really important stuff was done in the kind of final year. And for that bit, I was like crazy motivated. Like that final year came together really well.
Lots of coffee and no sleep.
Yeah, exactly.
Being a procrastinator myself, like I can relate to that, man. Because like I mean, going through college or how you call it university, there's that moment where that added pressure adds to your motivation to get it done, and to me, like I think the clearest when I had that pressure underneath me, where I know that I have to perform. That's when all the synapses are firing right online, and I'm thinking solely like tunnel vision on my project. Whatever it may be, whether it's a game or writing a thesis paper, whatever it may be, it forces you to focus in on that. So I could definitely relate to that.
Yeah. And I mean, as well, I think that was a big problem in our first years because there wasn't that pressure. Like we weren't releasing immediately. It was our investors' first game that they'd invested in, so they didn't necessarily know exactly what they were doing, so they weren't like imposing really strict deadlines on us. So I was like, I'm starting this game, like it's been 6 months since I started it, there's none of this pressure, I'll see how it goes, I'll take it easy. And I think that's a real danger of creating super procrastination, I think.
Especially, especially when it comes down to, like you said, your demo was 30 minutes, but then you had to like sit back and think, wait, I need a 5-hour game. That's why most TV shows and movies are only, 30 minutes to an hour, because people's brain capacity don't want to just sit and watch one thing. So you have to actually do something to intrigue their mind to keep them on something as
That's a really
long
good
as
point.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's like, wow, okay, I really have to focus now. Like what? And it's just like very interesting to see what you guys go through.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. And that's something that we kind of like, keeping a player's attention for that amount of time. Like we didn't really know what we were doing. Like we just kind of guessed. So like throughout most of the content that I was building, I kind of had an inkling, and you just go with your gut reaction, like whether you felt something was more difficult, whether you felt like that was a really hard puzzle, the player might need some downtime after this. And then pretty much most of the game was built with like this gut feeling that I can't really explain, or like it's not something you could learn or teach, I don't think. It was just an instinct more than anything else. And then but then after we did loads of playtesting and stuff, like that gut instinct was proven to be wrong a few times, so we had to change some stuff.
That's awesome. Fox, you got a question? Go ahead. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, I was going to add right quick to what he was saying. That must make the game pretty different and maybe even special, because the process changed, and next thing you know, you were jumping on the hype train after the fact. So, yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and because we'd created this really polished like 30-minute demo as well, and everyone expected the rest of the game to be like that, we had to kind of make sure that the entire 5 hours was like that polished as well. So, we'd created our own sort of weight of expectation in that regard as well.
I mean, I'd imagine that it's kind of like a catch-22 almost. Like you want everybody to be super hype and super excited for the game, right? But at the same time, once everybody starts getting really excited, that's when you start feeling that weight of expectation, right?
Yeah, for sure. You'll end up with a No Man's Sky on your hands.
Wow! Geez.
Shots fired! Shots fired!
That's actually great hearing from an actual developer about that game, because there's been a lot of gamers who have not, been satisfied with that game and what it was supposed to be. So, hearing someone who actually knows the process of going through it and has those kind of comments, it's actually really interesting.
Yeah, for sure. I think for those guys, I mean, they were in a really difficult position where they had this opportunity to make a boatload of money if they got on board with Sony, and then Sony hyped it to like essentially to death. Exactly. And it was so overhyped that it could never live up to those expectations.
Nope.
Yeah,
absolutely not.
I mean, I personally think if they cared more, for it to be a better game, what should have happened is it should have gone out onto early access maybe, and then it should have got like community involvement, and these issues should have been fixed like publicly, I think, rather than there being this massive kind of public backlash against it.
Exactly.
I think it's unfortunate that it kind of happened the way that it did.
It's so funny you say that, Henry, too, because I'm always like a proponent of, if you just tell the gamers like, hey, I'm sorry we screwed up, they're always forgiving, and they would back you more, and just come out and publicly say that. Like, I don't understand, like, I know we were talking behind before the show started, like, why is there so much secrecy kind of stuff, but like I just don't understand this concept lately.
Yeah.
And what's kind of funny, Brutal had made somewhat of a mention of this earlier before we started the show, about how, indie developers seem to add more of a uniqueness to their games instead of, the higher AAA ones that are backed by all these big companies and stuff like that. They don't seem to take as much risks and try to focus as much as actually putting the care and dedication into the game. Do you feel the same way when you personally see these games?
So I think so I know a lot of people that work at kind of AAA games companies, and like that care and dedication is there, but it's always in their individual craft. So if someone's really good at making like foliage models or something, or like building 3D cars, or like programming server stuff, like that love and that attention is always there. Like the people that work in games like have to be super passionate about what they do, because it's such a grueling, demanding industry. If they didn't, they would just go and work somewhere else and do something else. So I think that care and that attention is there. But what I think with a lot of these AAA games and other games maybe that come out that are less polished and have less care and attention is that there's like the higher ups, and the higher ups have got to make like difficult financial decisions, and they'll be like no, we're not gonna upgrade the game engine, or like we're not gonna like set up new servers or anything else because for various sort of money reasons. I think that's really the problem, and I think it's a real problem with EA at the moment and other like big publishers where there isn't an investment in quality long term. I think if they try and get the game out quickly, it's happened with Battlefront as well, isn't it? Games that are kind of churned out quickly without the kind of the attention to detail is just going to piss off gamers, and then gamers are going to go elsewhere, and then they're going to get a bad reputation. And like, it might not happen immediately, but like 5 or 10 years down the line, I think that's really going to burn these companies.
I agree.
Oh, wow, and that's kind of perfect into like where my next question was going, which is what can we get from indie games that it's missing from big AAA games? And also, what do you think about these companies like EA and Ubisoft? You think they're craving that in their own games?
Sure. So I think what AAA games do, or even AA games, is they go, before they ask anything else about the game, they go, who is our audience? They go, who is our audience? Let's build a game for that audience. And that audience is usually like a super broad, like a typical demographic that means they can get as many sales as possible or whatever. Whereas when I approached this game, I was like, what is an interesting way that you can interact with the game? And then I came up with this color mechanic, and then everything else kind of built out from that. And like at the beginning, I thought that the game was maybe going to work on mobile, it would potentially be a good mobile game. But because I wasn't bound to like an audience, I wasn't like, we're marketing it to these guys. The game evolved naturally, and then it ended up becoming like this much more sort of hardcore console game. Right. And so, like, if you listen to I think what AAA companies don't do is they don't listen to the design of the game. Like, they design the game to meet a criteria. Whereas if you're an indie developer, you can really listen to the design of the game, and you can design out from like a really core vision. And then naturally, because it's going to be a good game, because you've built a game with design in mind, there's going to be an audience for it. So I don't think indie developers have to worry so much about the financials and then the audience and everything else. And I think that's massively freeing when it comes to being creative and when you're making games.
Oh, wow.
Absolutely.
Amazing.
Do you think that the creativity, or not the creativity, but that passion gets lost in translation with trying to manage such a massive team on these bigger titles? Do you think that sense of intimacy gets lost throughout the... I mean, like you said, everyone has their niche that they're really good at. But do you think, as a broad, general, like, sweeping statement, do you think overall that true passion gets lost in the way of trying to push the game to make a profit? Because I don't get that same feeling from an indie title.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you do even get it on a smaller scale with independent stuff. Like, I've tried, when we've been struggling and stuff, I've tried to bring people onto the project in order to fulfill certain things that I was going to do myself, but I was like massively stressed with schedules and stuff. I was like, I'll bring some people on board to try and help out with various aspects of the game. And like, if as a sole developer, if you've got a very clear vision, and someone else isn't able to fulfill that, like something gets lost in communication. And then when you scale that up to like a massive studio, like everything trickles down and becomes more and more diluted. And I think if you've got really strong creative direction, it can be fine, and the game development can be like this collaborative effort where everyone's inputting loads of creative ideas. But if it's kind of mismanaged, I think what can happen is like everyone's qualities and skills, that they kind of get diluted, and you end up with like a half-baked product at the end, I guess.
Right.
Speaking of skills and stuff, going back to HUE, your first game, Cube, had more of a 3D, style look to it. Now, I've watched GKB because he's a 3D graphic designer, and I've watched him do his models and stuff like that. And now, when you went to HUE, it was more of a 2D. Was that your first intentions for this game? Was to actually go more of a I guess you'd call it a side-scroller style game instead of like a 3D looking game like Cube was the first time?
Sure. So actually, it's funny. When the work that I did on Cube was only 2D stuff anyway. So when it came to Cube, I didn't have like a massive like 3D role and stuff. That was a team of 5 other guys, and then I was just kind of helping them out with these bits and bobs. But aboard the Looking Glass, which was another game that I did myself, that was all 3D and with a similar style as well. I think this kind of ties in with what I was talking about earlier about listening to the design of the game, and it's not really about whether your game is 3D or whether it's 2D. It's about like you've got an idea and what's best suited to that idea more than anything else. So really, like the art style and the like whether it was 2D or 3D and pretty much everything about the input, like using the controller and stuff, all those decisions were made because it worked best for HUE, really.
Awesome. We just got a few minutes here with Henry. We're approaching our hour mark, so I wanted to go ahead and start closing up the show here. And I wanted to go ahead and give Mr. Hoffman some time to talk about his game here just for the last few minutes. Let us know where we can get our hands on it, when we can get our hands on it, and all that kind of stuff.
Cool. So HUE is a colourful puzzle adventure game. You can check it out at huethegame.com. It's out August 30th, I think, and that's on Xbox One. I'm losing track of reality. That's on Xbox One, PS4, and Windows, Mac, and Linux on Steam. And we're also releasing a PS Vita version, which is coming out in late September, I think. I'm supposed to be working on that at the moment. And yeah, check out the game. Thanks very much for having me on board.
It was an absolute pleasure. Go ahead.
Just a quick question. You mentioned the Vita is kind of like this style game is coming out in September. Now, is that going to be somewhat different from the original game that's releasing on the main consoles? So maybe it would push people more to buy both games because it will be different.
So I think that makes sense. But what we're doing is we've got cross-buy enabled, so that allows you to buy on one platform and own it on the other. So there's no real intention for people that already own the game on PS4, for example, to then buy the game on Vita as well, because they'll already own it. Really, it was just about getting the game onto as many platforms as possible, and it's great for people to be able to kind of take it out and show it to their friends and stuff from the Vita.
Okay.
Awesome.
But there are a few changes. I mean, because the Vita is like a lot less powerful than like current gen console stuff. So the entire gameplay experience is the same, but like a lot of the physics stuff we've had to tone down, and then some of the like particle visual effects and stuff we've toned down a little bit as well. But the actual core gameplay experience is the same.
Awesome.
Excellent.
Oh, yeah.
Henry, it was an absolute blast talking to you, man. I absolutely love HUE. I had such a great time with it. I plan to play through it a couple more times.
Awesome.
I gotta get those pesky what are they, the mixing bottles there or whatever?
Yeah.
I gotta go through and collect all those. Yeah. I still have to do that, but it was an absolute pleasure.
They're pretty hard.
They're tricky.
They are pretty hard.
We've had some reviewers that have emailed us and they've been like, tell me where they are.
Nah, I don't want you to tell me because I want to figure that out. But
yeah, cool, man.
It was absolutely fantastic. I want to let all these guys get off their little parting shots here. Go ahead, Fox.
Oh, well, it was awesome to have this one-on-one with you. It was pretty cool and interesting to listen to, a developer point of view and stuff like that. I'm really looking forward to playing this game. It's freaking beautiful, and yeah, that was pretty cool. Yeah.
All right, Brutal.
I am currently sending in my request to have my name changed to Henry Hoffman, so I can kind of channel some of that genius into my own life. It was an awesome interview, man. I really enjoyed the entire show. I can't thank you enough for coming out and talking to us. I thank you so much for giving some insight into your artistic procedure and your artistic approach to these games. That's my biggest love for indie titles, and again, man, thank you.
No problem.
That's really it, man.
And SheWolf.
And of course, I just want to say thank you. I had a pleasure even just, hanging out with you in the Beam chat and stuff like that where I first met you. And I really appreciate that you came on and did this with us. And, it's great, like everyone has said, to hear your ideas and how you came up with this game. Because truthfully, since the day, me and GKB played it, we just fell in love with this game. And it's just so enjoyable. And I just want to say thank you so much. And again, can you let everyone know how much this game is going to cost on release?
Sure. So it's going to be $14.99 with a 20% launch discount. So I think that's like $13, $12 or $13, I think.
Nice. Awesome.
Yep.
That is fantastic, guys. Go pick up this game. It is fantastic. It's an absolute blast. Like I said, the last 25% will drive you nuts, but it was still a great time. And that's it. We are out of here. Thanks again to Henry. We really appreciate it. And we'll see you next time. Take care of your fellow gamers.
Bye, guys.
Bye.